Vikings, those fearless seafarers and warriors, were known not only for their conquests and trade, but also, as new research suggests, for a horrifying predilection for human flesh. This wasn't merely about consuming enemies in a fit of battle frenzy or desperate sailors freezing on ice floes. Vikings consumed human flesh for ritualistic purposes, as punishment and as a symbol of power. They would unhesitatingly split bones to access nutritious bone marrow and serve the hearts of vanquished foes to their gods and guests at feasts in their grand halls. Ancient sagas only hinted at these grim customs, but archaeological discoveries provide irrefutable evidence. Cut marks on femurs found in Repton, skull fragments with knife marks discovered at Ridgway Hill, and tooth marks on ribs from mass graves in Denmark all point to a systematic and shocking phenomenon. But how deeply embedded was this practice in Viking culture? Was it a rare act of desperation, part of complex religious ceremonies, or something far more sinister? Modern scholars increasingly believe that cannibalism among Vikings was not merely incidental, but rather a widespread practice. From distant Iceland to prosperous Kiev, from sacred Uppsala to mercantile York, human remains bear witness to a horrifying systematic processing of bodies. Bones were split for marrow extraction, skulls opened to access the brain, and bodies butchered with the same meticulousness as livestock carcasses. Vikings didn't just raid and trade, they consumed human flesh for diverse purposes. The first compelling evidence emerged from a pit in Repton, Derbyshire, dating back to 873–874 AD. This was where the great heathen army wintered after a devastating defeat of the Kingdom of Mercia. A mass grave revealed the remains of 249 individuals, including men, women, and children. However, the condition of the bones raised alarms. Knife marks on femurs, cuts on ribs and skulls opened at the base indicated that these bodies had undergone a form of butchering process. Dr. Martin Biddle, who led the excavations in the 1980s, reached a chilling conclusion after meticulous analysis of the bones. He found evidence of systematic dismemberment of at least 30 bodies. Femurs split lengthwise for marrow extraction, vertebrae separated by sharp tools, and deep-cut marks on shoulder blades indicative of meat removal. These injuries were not the result of combat, but pointed to preparation for a feast. Notably, the warriors at Repton were not starving. The grave contained silver bracelets, iron weapons, gaming pieces, and other rich grave goods intermingled with the butchered bones. One skeleton wore a Thor's hammer amulet, with knife marks visible on its ribs. Another had a sword beside it and tooth marks on an arm bone. Wealth and cannibalism went hand in hand. However, Repton was not the only site to yield such evidence. In 2009, archaeologists discovered a similar pit at Ridgway Hill, Dorset, containing 54 decapitated bodies, all young men with identical cut marks. Knife marks on cervical vertebrae indicated decapitation, while chop marks on long bones suggested meat removal. Radiocarbon dating placed the remains between 1000 and 1050 AD, a period of active Viking raids on the English coast. The bodies from Ridgway Hill tell a gruesome story. These men were captured, executed, and then butchered. Their heads were taken as trophies and their bodies dismembered for consumption. Chemical analysis of the bones indicated they grew up in Scandinavia, likely Denmark. They arrived as invaders, but ended as food. Dr. Louise Lowe, who oversaw the analysis of the Ridgway Hill remains, presented the stark facts in her report. Evidence of systematic dismemberment is consistent with human consumption. Cut marks on 80% of the bones, marrow extraction on 60%. These were not random combat injuries, but methodical butchery performed by individuals who knew what they were doing. Ancient Norse sagas also corroborate these horrifying archaeological findings. Hegel's Saga mentions the eating of enemies' hearts, and Völsunga Saga describes Sigurd drinking dragon's blood, also referencing the consumption of human flesh in battle contexts. Håkon the Good's Saga recounts the ritualistic eating of enemies' flesh to gain their strength. These stories were not mere metaphors, but rather recollections of actual events. The Icelandic law code Gragas, dating to around 1100, explicitly forbade the consumption of human flesh under threat of severe penalties. This law was not arbitrary. It was enacted because cannibalism was a real and troubling issue. Icelandic settlers brought with them mainland customs, including dietary ones. Archaeological excavations across Scandinavia reveal similar patterns. In Birka, Sweden, human bones with cut marks were found in waste pits. At Hedeby, Denmark, processed human remains were discovered mixed with animal bones. In Trondheim, Norway, skull fragments with deliberate damage were found. This practice spread wherever Viking feet trod. The most disturbing evidence comes from religious sites. The temple complex at Old Uppsala contains fragments of human bones with clear signs of processing. Adam of Bremen wrote of human sacrifices at this location in the 1170s, but made no mention of the subsequent consumption of bodies. The bones, however, tell their own story. Sacred sacrifices, it appears, became sacred meals. But Viking cannibalism wasn't solely religious. It was also driven by practical considerations. Long sea voyages meant protein scarcity. Ibn Fadlan, an Arab traveler, described how Vikings ate everything available during their river journeys. Human flesh was simply another food source when supplies ran low. Winter camps became sites of even greater horrors. The siege of Paris in 885 lasted for many months. The chronicles of Charles the Fat mention Viking desperation, but specific details are omitted. However, archaeological layers from that period show mixed human and animal bones with identical processing marks. When the besieged ran out of food, the besiegers, it seems, ate their dead. Vikings spared neither enemies nor even their own deceased, employing sophisticated methods of body processing. They possessed impressive knowledge of human anatomy, which allowed them to butcher bodies efficiently. First, they disarticulated joints, then separated major muscle groups, and finally split bones to extract marrow. This technique was similar to their skills in butchering cattle and sheep. Human flesh was regarded as ordinary meat by those who lived by war. Religious cannibalism adhered to strict rules. Enemy chiefs were consumed to appropriate their strength. Ahmed ibn Rusta mentioned Rus warriors eating enemies' hearts directly on the battlefield. This was not a random act of violence, but rather spiritual warfare. By consuming an enemy's flesh, they believed they absorbed their bravery. Berserkers went even further. The Ynglinga saga tells of warriors eating raw meat before battle. Archaeological findings from warrior burials show worn teeth, indicating the chewing of raw meat. Berserkers didn't just wear animal skins. They sought to gain the strength of a bear, the cunning of a wolf, and human bravery through ritualistic cannibalism. Cannibalism also served social functions. The communal consumption of human flesh strengthened bonds among warriors. Blood brothers were not just allies. They were individuals who had eaten the same enemy together. The strongest warrior societies practiced ritual consumption to solidify their ranks. Trust was forged from shared taboos. Cannibalism also served as public punishment. Criminals and traitors were executed, and their bodies then consumed in front of the entire community. The Landnámabók mentions instances where oath-breakers were eaten by their former comrades. Death was not enough. They had to be physically integrated into those they betrayed. It was the ultimate form of humiliation. Alongside ritualistic cannibalism, there was also medicinal cannibalism. Viking healers used human body parts as medicine. Ground bones for fortifying potions, blood to treat iron deficiency, and flesh to combat wasting diseases. Bald's Leech Book contains references to Norse healing methods using human ingredients. Cannibalism was a component of their healthcare system. The economy of human flesh spawned its own markets. Slave raids aimed not only at capturing labor, but also at acquiring protein. At the Dublin slave market, people were sold for both labor and consumption. In 900 AD, a living person cost 12 silver dirhams, while a dead and butchered one cost 8. Human meat had its price. Funerary cannibalism completed this cycle. Important deceased individuals were not merely cremated or buried, they were partially consumed by family members. Ibn Fadlan's description of Rus' funeral rites included drinking the deceased's blood mixed with alcohol. Archaeological findings from ship burials show partially processed human remains alongside grave goods. The dead, for a final time, nourished the living. DNA analysis of Viking-age bone fragments confirms familial connections between consumers and consumed. Mothers ate stillborn children, fathers consumed fallen sons, and siblings shared each other's flesh. Cannibalism was not only an act against enemies, but also a way to preserve family strength within the lineage. Christianization led to the decline of this practice, but it didn't disappear entirely. Norwegian law codes from the 1200s still stipulated punishments for cannibalism. The custom went underground rather than dying out. Secret warrior societies continued to observe old dietary rituals well into the Middle Ages. Christianity couldn't instantly eradicate the craving for human flesh. Recent excavations continue to find confirmation of this. In 2020, a medieval pit with processed human bones was discovered in Copenhagen. Radiocarbon analysis showed they dated to 1300, 2 centuries after official Christianization. Old customs persisted in hidden corners. People continued to eat people even after the gods, presumably, had changed. Trade routes carried not only silver and amber, but also recipes for preparing human meat. Byzantine sources mention Varangian guardsmen serving northern delicacies at imperial banquets. Arab merchants wrote of Rus traders offering preserved human meat alongside walrus ivory. This commodity traveled through the same channels as furs and slaves. Preparation methods varied by region. Norwegian Vikings preferred urs, smoking human flesh, like salmon. Swedish groups favored salting and storing it in wooden barrels. Danish raiders developed battlefield processing techniques, turning fresh kills into portable protein within hours. Each method left distinctive cut marks that archaeologists can identify even today. Children were introduced to cannibalism early. Bone analysis from Birka shows adolescent tooth marks on processed human remains. Children as young as 8 participated in consumption rituals. The practice was normalized through childhood exposure. By adulthood, eating people seemed as natural as consuming pork. The culture was passed down through generations. Women played a significant role in preparing human meat. They butchered bodies while men were on raids. Archaeological findings from Hedeby show female skeletons with tool wear marks consistent with butchery. Women were not merely victims of Viking cannibalism, they were active participants, skillfully dismembering human bodies for maximum nutritional value. Cannibalism in the Viking Age was far more widespread than previously believed, encompassing diverse forms, from ritualistic to practical. The cannibalism of the Great Viking Army was not confined to Repton. Archaeological excavations at Torksey, Lincolnshire, revealed similar signs of human remains. Processing. This was where the Viking army wintered in 872-873, a year before the events at Repton. The discovered cut marks, marrow extraction techniques, and systematic butchery of bodies suggest that the Vikings refined their cannibalistic skills as they advanced deeper into England. The Torksey bone pit contained 112 bodies, and radiocarbon analysis confirmed they died during the Viking occupation. Cut marks on 96 skeletons indicate consistent body processing. These findings suggest that the Vikings did not acquire cannibalistic skills in England but brought them along, like professional butchers who had honed their craft. Ship burials reveal the practice of maritime cannibalism. Processed human bones were found on the Oseberg ship alongside 2 female burials. Cut marks on the bones indicate ritualistic consumption of human flesh during the funeral ceremony. The deceased queen's retinue served her not only in life, but also became sustenance for her transition to the afterlife. The Gokstad ship burial tells a similar story. 26 human remains with processing marks were not sacrifices. Isotopic analysis showed they originated from various geographical regions. The ship's captain collected human meat during numerous raids, combining trophies and provisions. Cannibalism during the settlement of Iceland mirrored mainland patterns. The Book of Settlements mentions Skallagrímur eating his enemies after land disputes. Archaeological excavations in Reykjavik have revealed processed human bones in early settlement layers, indicating that the first Icelanders brought their appetites across the North Atlantic. Viking settlements in Greenland saw extreme forms of cannibalism. Harsh environmental conditions pushed human flesh consumption beyond cultural norms. Excavations at the Western settlement revealed fully processed skeletons, with every bone split for marrow extraction and every skull opened for brain removal. In conditions where survival depended on utilizing all available resources, nothing went to waste. Eric the Red's Saga mentions cannibalism during the first Greenlandic winter, when 25 settlers died of cold and starvation, and the survivors ate them to last until spring. The saga presents this as a necessity, not a shame, emphasizing practical protein management under impossible circumstances. Vinland expeditions brought cannibalism to North America. At Landsö Meadows, processed human bones were found in waste pits. Vikings ate indigenous people captured during exploration and also consumed their own dead during harsh North American winters. This marked the first European cannibalism in the New World. Religious sites across Scandinavia point to systematic human consumption. At the old Uppsala temple complex, bone deposits spanning 3 centuries reveal layer upon layer of processed human remains. Sacrifices were eaten after being offered to the gods, and divine consumption was accompanied by human consumption. The Ledre complex in Denmark reveals similar patterns at royal sacrificial sites with extensive butchery evidence. Kings not only slew enemies for the gods, but also served them as sacred meals to visiting nobles, using cannibalism for diplomacy and cementing political alliances with human flesh. Runic stones sometimes directly mention cannibalism. The Ruk runestone mentions 9 generations given to eagles and wolves, but other interpretations suggest human consumption. The stone's complex text includes references to eating the dead, immortalizing cannibalism in stone. Medical texts from Iceland describe remedies derived from human flesh. The King's Mirror recommends ground human bone for joint pain, fresh human blood for weakness, and powdered human heart for bravery. Viking medicine incorporated their enemies as pharmaceutical ingredients. Leprosy treatment involved human consumption, and Icelandic medical manuscripts prescribed fresh human liver for skin ailments. The logic was sympathetic magic. Consuming healthy human tissues was believed to transfer health to the sick, turning cannibalism into a form of healthcare. Dental evidence confirms widespread cannibalism. Viking Age skeletons exhibit characteristic wear patterns, from chewing tough human flesh, teeth worn at unusual angles, molars cracked by bone fragments, and overdeveloped jaw muscles from processing difficult meat. The evidence lies in every Viking's mouth. Parasite analysis from Viking latrines reveals human consumption. Species of roundworms that survive only in human flesh are found in Norse coprolites. Vikings didn't just eat human meat occasionally, they consumed it regularly enough to sustain populations of human-specific parasites in their intestines. Weapon analysis reveals tools of cannibalism, specialized knives for disarticulation, marrow extractors, and hammers for splitting skulls. Vikings developed technologies specifically designed for processing human bodies, and specialized cannibalism equipment has been found in warrior burials across Scandinavia. Increasing evidence of cannibalism continues to be found, revealing a dark chapter in Viking history. Archaeological findings indicate that human remains were processed in the same manner as animal remains. In cooking utensils found in Birka, protein analysis revealed traces of human tissue. Pots used for boiling beef were also used. For preparing human flesh, there was no distinction between utensils for animals and humans. Humans were simply another ingredient. Trade included processed human remains. For instance, amber beads with human bone fragments inside were discovered, as were ornaments made from enemy remains and drinking horns adorned with human skull fragments. Vikings wore what they had consumed. The runic alphabet also contained symbols possibly related to cannibalism. One rune, believed to denote cannibalism, appears in contexts indicating human flesh consumption, such as on bone knives and carvings near butchery sites. Perhaps the writing system encoded cannibalistic practices that were openly observed. The weather conditions documented in historical records align with periods when cannibalism flourished. Dendrochronology reveals that particularly harsh winters coincided with mass graves filled with processed human bones. Cold years led to food shortages, which in turn resulted in anthropophagy. Thus, climate spurred cannibalistic cycles in medieval Scandinavia. Even the adoption of Christianity did not immediately halt this practice. Church records from Norway mention punishments for consuming human flesh well into the 1300s. Bishops struggled to eradicate the practice in remote communities where old traditions remained strong. Secret societies continued to perform cannibalistic rituals even after Christianization. The Vikings, known for their ferocity, reportedly practiced ritualistic anthropophagy as late as the 11th century. Elite warrior units preserved old traditions underground. Christianity conquered the temples, but not the dining halls. Archaeological excavations indicate a decline in cannibalism over time. Layers dating to the 12th century show fewer processed human bones, and by the 13th century, they are almost non-existent. The practice gradually faded as Christian influence strengthened, but never entirely disappeared. Modern DNA analysis sheds light on the extent of Viking cannibalism. Genetic material extracted from tooth enamel reveals that the consumed individuals originated from various parts of Europe. Irish slaves ended up in Danish stomachs, English captives in Norwegian teeth, and Scottish prisoners in Swedish bone marrow. The Vikings carved a path across the continent, devouring their enemies. The most gruesome discovery was made in a bog in Jutland. The preserved stomach contents of a Viking age body revealed partially digested human flesh mixed with barley and herbs. This individual had eaten someone just hours before their death. Cannibalism was so common that it became their final meal. The bog acids preserved the evidence of his last supper, including fragments of human finger phalanges still in his stomach acid. But the true revelation came from soil analysis beneath medieval churches. Layers of human bone fragments mixed with food waste. Converted Vikings buried their cannibalistic past beneath Christian foundations. Every church in Denmark stands on evidence of what came before. Sacred ground built upon human consumption. Human flesh was simply meat to people who lived by their appetites.